liked to gamble. And he gambled a lot too. And my mother was a beautiful woman. She really was. And this is a photograph that was taken in 1938. Each of these have, some little stories to tell. My father holding my hand, my mother adjusting her bag, and the people in the back all dressed up. It was September 1938, and we were going to the synagogue to celebrate the Jewish New Year of Rosh Hashanah, all dressed up. My mom called me the Little Prince. And I was a pretty good-looking kid then. So, that was life. 10 days later was Yom Kippur. Praying to God to forgive us for the sins that we committed against God, and for the sins that we commit against people, as you know. We have to ask those whom we sinned against to forgive us. And I get that question asked a lot in a reverse way. Do I forgive? And I always have very difficulty answering that. It's difficult for me to forgive, knowing that I'm up here and up in heaven are the children who were silenced and never were able to tell their stories. Two months later, just 2 months after Rosh Hashanah, Kristallnacht, November 9 and 10, in Germany. You all know what that is. German shops were ruined. People were dragged out of their homes, especially the men taken to Dachau. And synagogues were set aflame. Like this one here. Synagogue in Frankfurt am Main, where my father had his bar mitzvah. He had his marriage there to my mother, 1923. And one of the things that I never knew about my dad, I found this postcard, and this is the way it looked. This is how it was. Beautiful synagogue. And on the back, he made some notes. Bar mitzvah, 1910. Heirat means married, 1923. And above that, synagogue and choir. He was a choir boy. My dad was, I couldn't believe it. The big gambler was a choir boy. Oh gosh. And he was a character though, too. And here is a photograph of just my mom and I walking down the main avenue in Antwerp, Belgium, where I was born in 1936. For those who are interested, I'm 82 years old. I still have all my hair. And May 10, 1940 is when Germany invaded Belgium. Usually on a Friday morning, my mom and I would get up early. We would go to the synagogue, not the synagogue, to the Jewish bakery, and buy the challah, the braided bread, to begin Shabbat on Friday night. We never got out. The Germans bombed the city in the morning of May 10, Friday morning. A lot of people left right away. We couldn't. We didn't have a car. My dad, gambling habits hurt us. We had to wait 3 days to get a taxi that took us from Antwerp to areas where we had been on vacation before. From Antwerp to Daan. When we got to that area, there were hundreds of thousands of refugees who were on the road. German planes came flying down that treetop level. They were shooting at us with their machine guns. Had an effect on me in later life. Nightmares of planes crashing down on me and other types of nightmares. Being taken away as a child, somebody coming into the bedroom and taking me away. So the effects of children was enormous. A lot of children faced traumas, and I wasn't the exception. And sometimes, it happens a little bit once in a while. But I took control of that. So we finally got down to Calais. You can see it on the map up there, in France. And I remember this incident. Because I was only 3 or 4 years old, I didn't remember much. So in later life, I asked my 2 brothers to tell me the story, and my mom too. She added quite a lot as well. My father, he passed away before I got interested in my own story. He never talked about it. Never talked about some of his siblings who perished in the Holocaust. He kept it all to himself. So we were in Calais, and the German planes came flying down. I remember my mom picking me up and throwing me into a ditch and covering me with her own body. Luckily, we were all saved. It was a miracle. My brother Sammy had told me there were lots of casualties on the roads of refugees being shot at. The German troops hadn't yet arrived, but they were very close. And my brother Leo had told me that he saw retreating French and British soldiers who helped out the Belgians, warning the refugees, you have to move fast. The Germans are coming into the area. We got into Abbeville, and there we slept in a small hotel overnight. We did that a few times. My father had money with him, and he could pay for it. And he was a diamond cutter, and a very good one. So when Germany invaded Belgium, the first thing that he did was go to the bank and take everything out. The diamonds and the money that he saved. So we got up early in the morning in Abbeville. It was deserted, nobody there. A beautiful French Catholic town. And a truck comes by and picks us up. It was a miracle. Everything I'm telling you was luck. We were lucky at every step of the way. The truck picked us up. I went on the internet a few years ago, and I found this truck with refugees on them. My family and I are on that truck. In the back here is my mom and my dad. I'll go to close-ups. Here's my mom and dad. Look how she looks now. Wearing about 3 or 4 layers of clothes. And my father, smoking a cigar. He smoked cigars and cigarettes all the time. And that's my brother Leo right there. And here, oops. And here is Sammy and I. Sammy holding his little baby brother, whom he called his baby brother all of his life. He was a good man. He's my hero. You'll find out why. So, we got dropped off in Dieppe, and from there we took a train to Paris. And while we were in Paris, staying over with my father's younger sister who lived there with her family, Belgium and Holland surrendered, as well as the little country of Luxembourg, May 28th. And the Germans started coming into France. And so we had to flee again after a while. And we fled from Paris all the way down to Bordeaux. The west coast, southern west coast of France. And we were trapped in France all the time. There was no place for us to go. France was surrounded by countries that were not friendly to the Jewish people. Switzerland, Austria, Italy, and of course Germany. And on the other side was the Atlantic Ocean. So we got trapped down in, can you see over this? Okay. We got trapped in Hyundai and Dax and Po. In Dax, we slept in a barn. A farmer came by and told us that he'd hide us in the barn. And we were there for about a week, and the family fed us. And then he came in later, and the farmer said we had to leave. The rumor was that the Germans were coming into the area. And so we took one of those international Red Cross buses that transported refugees to a number of villages. And we ended up in Pau, P-A-U, in the Pyrenees Mountains. We slept in a school gymnasium on cots. In the morning we had to leave because the kids were coming to school. So this was our life. Always on the run, homeless. I mean, what effect did that have on me? Never mind my parents, who really never recovered from their experiences, especially my mom. She was always in a very depressive stage. And it was my 2 brothers, really, that took over and cared for me, Sammy and Leo. So we got onto this plane, Po, and one morning, the French police come in and order us out of the school. And we boarded some buses, and they told us that they were going to take us to other villages, and we could be on our way. And they took us to this place here, Camp Gers. It's a huge internment camp where the Germans and the French, when the French started cooperating with the Germans after they were surrendered to Germany, there were thousands of Jews in that camp. In 1942, I believe there were 4,000 Jews, and they were all deported to Auschwitz. It was a holding camp. I mean, the conditions were horrible, the food was terrible. I slept on the floor covered just with straw in one of these bunkers. My father and my two brothers were on one side of the road of the camp, and my mom and I were on the other side. And my mom was afraid, are we going to ever see each other again? And so the Germans and the French used that camp to imprison Jews. And then when it came time to start the roundups of Jews, Gers was one of the first places to be emptied out and shipped, transported first up north to a holding pen outside of Paris, and then from Paris to Poland to the death camps. 75,000 Jews were deported from France. So how come I'm here, Again, look, Sammy, 16 years old, he escapes from the camp. He told the guard he wasn't feeling well. Can I go to the infirmary? And the guard gave him permission to go. And so Sammy walked up. He saw that the gate next to the infirmary, there was nobody manning it. So he simply walked out. He was once he was beyond the camp, he hitchhiked to a nearby town, got a hold of the village mayor, asked him how he could get his parents and brothers out of the camp. And he couldn't help him, but the village mayor told him to go back to Pau and see this French official who was in charge of the area. So Sammy hitchhiked back to Pau, walked into the French official's office, 16 years old, and told the French official, why are you holding us? We didn't do anything wrong. And my brother Sammy told me that French official took pity on him. Believe it? Took pity on him and signed some documents for Sammy to take back to the camp that ordered the commandant of the camp to release us. So Sammy hitchhiked back to the camp. And he told me it took about 3 days from the time that he escaped to the time he returned to the camp. And that was pretty gutsy. Who knew that the commandant would obey that order? There was a chance that Sammy took. So the order was obeyed, and we were released from the camp and dropped off at a nearby village, and we stayed in an abandoned castle, all right, for about another week or so. And then we had to go again, always on the go, always on the go. And it's thanks to, the people. I have to thank those people, the farmer who hid us in the barn, the village mayor who told us what to do, some others who hid us out. They were all Christians or Catholics, maybe even non-believers, but they had the moral conscience to help. And we refer to these people as the righteous Gentiles of the Holocaust, the righteous among the nations. And I am so thankful to those people. Without their help, I wouldn't be here. And without the help of others in my story as well, as I continue to tell it to you. So, oops. Can you hear me? Okay. So we were outside of Gerson, a little village, and the village mayor, he took us to a train station in Oran-Saint-Marie, and from there we went to Toulouse and to Marseille. In Marseille, we stayed until October of 1940. It became dangerous to remain there. The French government started passing laws against the Jewish people. Among them was any foreign Jew who looked suspicious by the police could be arrested and either sent back to Gers or to some other holding internment camp nearby. And there were other internment camps in France. So we had to leave Marseille. This is where my father would use his smarts. He knew that something was happening, and he took off with his family from Marseille to Nice. Beautiful, beautiful place to be at. A vacation spot for the celebrities. And we were safe in Nice because that area was under the control of the Italians. Italy, even though it was an ally of Germany. When Hitler signed the surrender documents of France, when France surrendered to Hitler, Mussolini, he wanted to take part in the action, so he invaded the French Riviera. But thanks to that invasion, we were saved because the Italian diplomats who administered that area were very friendly to the Jewish people. And there's a book written about that. Not only that, but we lived in the hotel where the Italian diplomats had their offices. And we were fortunate because they always informed us either to stay inside and not move because the French police were coming in, the SS was coming in, especially at the time of when the roundups began in 1942. They wanted, especially the Nazis, wanted the Italians to give over the names and addresses of Jews who lived in the area, and they refused to do so. And so they left. And later on, the council people, the Italians, the Nazis arrested them, and they were never heard from again. And so the French and the Germans got together and began the roundups in 1942. 10,000 Jews were ordered to be arrested by the Nazis. The order went out to the French police, and they stormed the whole area, Nice, villages outside of Nice, and a miracle happened. Lots of miracles. Somebody said today, you know what? You're a walking miracle. On August the 25th, a young man comes running to the hotel. He sees my father. He tells my dad, we have to leave immediately because the hotel was going to be raided the next morning. And my father, according to my brother Leo, asked this young man, well, how do you know this? a French policeman was friendly with this young man who came running to the hotel. So here's an example that I show to young people about those who refused to stand by, who took action, risking their own lives. And there were some, not as many as we wanted, but there were some, and we are all grateful to them. So what does my dad do? He became friendly with an Italian Catholic whom he really got to know well, and they gambled together at the casino. And so he called him up, hide us out. The Italian came over within the hour and picked us up, left everything behind, not that we had much in the hotel, and took us to his home and hid us out. But I wanted to take one thing with me that I cherished, and that was my bike. Show you some photographs. Oops. Can you still hear me? Yes. All right. Told you I'm wired. Here is Leo teaching me how to ride that bike, taken in 1941. The next picture is of me and my first best friend on the right. He and his mother lived at the hotel. They originally came from Turkey. And from what I understand, they were of Turkish royalty. But what was outstanding to me was my first friend. Okay? My first friend was a Muslim. How about that, huh? Too bad that I can't find him. Maybe we could have solved some issues together. Maybe, you never know. I think of him a lot. His name was Mickey Abet. And he was a handsome guy. The next picture is, here is Leo. I told you earlier it was my brothers who took care of me. We were walking down the main avenue along in Nice, along the Mediterranean Sea, the beach. Here's my mom and dad. Look how skinny they are. And then my brother Sammy, 18 years old now. His teeth were rotting because of malnutrition. There was a food shortage in 1941, and I insisted mainly on eating tangerines. Okay, so what happened was near the end of, around the third week in September, about that time in 1942, the Catholic family became afraid that somebody in the neighborhood would inform on them that they were hiding a Jewish family. So they asked us to leave, and we were dropped off at the train station in Nice. And we boarded the train, and I had my bike with me, and it was ringed by French police, and the French policeman came over and took my bike away. So we boarded the train, and we went up to Grenoble, along the French Alps. And there we met some nuns, Catholic nuns, who were at the train station trying to rescue refugees. And a couple of them came over to my father and told him that if he had some money, they could find a smuggler to help us cross into Switzerland. And he did have some money, and he gave the money to the nuns, and the nuns found the smuggler. And from Grenoble, we took a train, and not too far away from the Swiss border, about 4 miles west of the Swiss border, we met the smuggler in a little village at lunch, and then he told us to go to a little barn next door. It was at a hotel, and he would wake us up in the middle of the night. And he did do that. And we got to Switzerland, to the border. And at the border, the Swiss guard tells us, and there were other refugees with us, tells us that he would only allow people into the country who had relatives living there. That's my mom as a teenager, and her mother. She was a widow. They lived near the German border along Poland after World War I. My mother told God, my mother lives in Switzerland. How did she ever get to Switzerland? She was a widow, and she met a traveling salesman from Switzerland, and they fell in love with each other. And he wanted to take her to Switzerland and begin a new life. But he didn't want the daughter to go with them. So what was the decision her mother made? She put her own daughter, 14 years old, she put her in an orphanage and abandoned her. My mother always told me, as I was growing up in New York, don't trust anybody. Never trust anyone. And when I heard that story from Sammy's daughter and my mom were very close, I understood where she came from. I mean, if you can't trust your own mother, who can you trust? I brought that question up, talking last week to some boys who had issues, and they were in a home. And many of them were abused children. They were teenagers. And I told them about that story. And I said, who can you trust? And one of the boys said, trust yourself. And I kind of felt that way too. I trusted my own instincts as I was growing up. I had problems, psychological problems, but as one young student told me a few weeks ago, no, last year, you were a strong kid. And I was. I was a strong kid. Am I going overtime here? I know it can be emotional. So the Swiss guards called up where my grandmother lived to make sure that she was telling the truth. And so we were not free yet. We ended up in a displaced persons camp. My mom and I and Leo were in one camp, and my father was in another camp. That little kid is me. My mom and my dad, they were there until November of 1943 and released after the Swiss began to realize that the Germans were going to lose the war. I was only there for about 3 months. And sometime in early 1943, social service agencies came into town and they asked the mothers whether they would want their children to live with foster families. And she went through a lot, she really did. And it probably was a little bit of a relief to her, not to care for us, put it that way, but just for her to be in her own thoughts. And so I lived with a foster family for about a year, and my brother lived with another foster family in another town for about the same time. And I had a tough time. They had a son, the foster family, that abused me, was very jealous of me. The father fell in love with me. We went out hiking together, just he and I. And I guess his own son got really terribly jealous. And so he took it out on me, beat me up, sexually abused me. 6 years old. I talked a little bit about being by myself. It protected me from harm. So in 1944, early 44, I was reunited with my family, living with my grandmother in Zurich. Here is a picture of me on the right and my friend Max, the schoolmate. I got a nice smile there. Not a bad looking kid either. And here I am back in Antwerp, Belgium. It's 9 years old. And I grow up, go to college at New York University, majored in journalism, get married, have 3 boys from my first marriage. Adam in the middle with the glasses on, to the right is Mark, and to Adam's left is Josh. And then Jonathan, the youngest from the second marriage. And he's getting married on June the 22nd. June 22, the day that France surrendered to Germany. Same date. I hope he's not surrendering his life. I like that. You can see a picture was taken at the synagogue a few months ago when my third granddaughter had her bat mitzvah. You can see the Torahs in the background. And the next picture is of my grandchildren. Haley in the middle, wearing the blue dress. On the left is Ashley. She's the lady who had her bat mitzvah. On the right is Dylan, and they're all Adams' daughters. And the boys are Josh's boys, Gabriel to the left, and Miles in the middle. Hey, 82 years old. Okay, you know about the shoes? Yes. At the Museum of Men, Women, and Children Who Perished. And here are my shoes. These are my baby shoes that my mom held on during the entire journey. And I have them right here. lucky guy, aren't I? Huh? Lucky to be with you wonderful people who I cherish, who I love. To be loved and to be kind. We need more of that, you know. There's too much hatred going on. It's unbelievable throughout the world, not only in America, but throughout the world. And I tell that to young people, and I say to them, you're the ones that we depend upon to make this a better life for all of us. And I hope, I just hope that happens. And ladies and gentlemen, that's my story.